Hello, I'm Janine Turner, founder of Constituting America. I and Kathy Gillespie, Constituting America's CEO, welcome you to Constituting America's annual 90-day study. 90 plus 90 equals 180. History holds the key to the future. We would like to thank Amanda Hughes for orchestrating these fabulous studies. This year's study is First Principles on the American Founding. Today's essay is Essay 14, The Principle of Civic Duty to Petition Their Own Government for a Redress of Grievances. Guest essayist, Andrew Langer. A key element in America's quest for independence was the ire that certain colonists felt at being taxed without representation, an overly simplified view of decades of frustration at a variety of policies imposed by the British Crown on colonial America without the consent of the citizens of the colonies. Part and parcel of this was the difficulty the citizens had in presenting those grievances to the Crown or Parliament, and the perception that those who did voice concerns or opposition were singled out for punishment by the government. So as the Constitution was being drafted and further constraints were being placed on the power of government via the Bill of Rights, the founders included language in the First Amendment ensuring that citizens would retain a right to so petition the government when they were aggrieved, with a corresponding assurance found in the Fifth Amendment that when such substantive petitioning is made, quote, due process, end quote, is accorded to the petitioner. An example, that a fair and just process is made available to the person or persons petitioning. When most people consider this, they think about the right of individuals to advocate or otherwise speak their minds before legislators, an example, to offer their opinion on legislation. But in an era in which policy is increasingly being delegated to the executive branch, it is important to examine how this right, or civic duty, is protected within the context of the, quote, administrative, end quote, state. When Congress passes a law, it is then up to the executive branch to interpret and enforce that law, to, quote, administer, end quote, it. In other words, and thus the administrative state. The more vague that law might be, and sometimes not so vague, the greater leeway an agency has to interpret the law. For example, Congress passes the Clean Water Act in 1972. In that law, they made it illegal to pollute a navigable water of the United States. Because Congress failed to define words or phrases like pollute or navigable or water of the United States, they left it up to the executive branch to define them. The right to petition then plays a singular role in this. The agency presents its proposal for how to define terms, or more broadly, how they plan on interpreting and enforcing any piece of legislation. And it then opens a process whereby the public can comment on their proposals. This process is governed by a law known as the, quote, Administrative Procedure Act, end quote, APA. The APA was passed by Congress in 1946 in order to standardize the petitioning, commenting process across the federal executive branch. Prior to that point, each agency had the discretion to create its own process, something that can make overly complicated the ability of citizens to exercise their right to petition for redress. Now, with few exceptions, the process by which someone can, quote, comment, end quote, or a, quote, rulemaking, end quote, is the same, regardless of whether someone is filing that comment with the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, the Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, or the Department of Interior. A rulemaking is the standard term by which an agency goes through the process or creating or amending the regulations that have been created out of a congressional legislation. A, quote, comment is just that, the opinion filed by a person or group regarding that regulatory proposal. At its most basic level, the process works this way. Either Congress passes a new law or amends a law, or the agency wants to make changes to existing policies, and they announce this in a daily publication called the Federal Register. They offer their proposal in something called a, quote, notice of proposed rulemaking, end quote, or less frequently, an even earlier step called the, quote, advance notice of proposed rulemaking, end quote, and tells the public how they can comment on these proposals. Anyone can file a comment, and it has never been easier to do so. Most agencies utilize an online portal called regulations.gov to both announce proposals and solicit for comments, and comments can be submitted online with a matter of clicks. It is a system that the Founding Fathers would have enthusiastically applauded, though many would have been horrified at the concentration of power in the executive branch. The idea that any citizen could, with a touch of a button, voice their substantive concern about a policy proposal would have heartened them at the same time. They just would have been concerned that not more people were aware of this. As part of the APA, agencies are required to answer such, quote, petitions, end quote, when they are substantive, in the publication of their, quote, final rule, end quote, an example of the finalized regulatory policy, either demonstrating where they have made changes to the proposal in accordance with those substantive comments, or explained why they didn't make such changes. Failure to do so opens the regulation to court challenges on the grounds that the new rule is, quote, arbitrary, capricious, and abuse of discretion or otherwise not in accordance with the law, end quote. Even better, the APA doesn't require that the citizenry wait until the agency makes a regulatory proposal in order to have changes to a rule made. Another aspect of the manifestation of the right to petition for the redress of grievances within the APA is the right to petition a regulatory agency to open up a rulemaking. Again, with the agency being required to respond if they decide to not go through a new rulemaking process. While the APA's rulemaking process applies to nearly all agencies, agencies within the national security and defense spheres are generally recognized to be exempt. Though some will engage in this, quote, notice and comment, end quote, process when they have policy changes that they know will be controversial or otherwise of tremendous interest to the public. Likewise, transactional decision-making and contracting are not open to this APA's process, though citizens always have the right to comment on such issues with those agencies. What is worth noting is that the deliberative process of the APA can be frustrating, especially to policymakers, and the citizenry needs to be on guard for when agencies attempt to sidestep the APA. Increasingly, agencies are turning to what they claim are quasi-rulemakings, smaller proceedings that the agencies claim are not subject to the full APA notice and comment process. These agencies create guidance documents and interpretation letters purporting to carry the full force of regulatory law, but aren't subject to the full vetting that a rulemaking allows. The Competitive Enterprise Institute refers to such activity as, quote, regulatory dark matter, end quote. And while in January of 2017, the president created an executive order to substantially rein in regulatory dark matter, the following administration undid that executive order almost immediately upon taking office in 2021. Thankfully, Congress is becoming ever more aware of the problem of regulatory dark matter and is working to hold the executive branch accountable. In the end, given the size and scope of the modern administrative state in the U.S., the notice and comment process under the APA is of vital importance and emblematic of the enduring importance of the right or civic duty to petition our government for a redress of grievances. Andrew Langer is president of the Institute for Liberty, as well as chairman and founder of the Institute for Regulatory Analysis and Engagement. Thanks for joining us today for Essay 14. Please join us tomorrow for Essay 15. And please spread the word on your social media and to friends and family via text and email about this wonderful, most informative study. And don't forget to check out last year's study on American exceptionalism. If you're ever in a conversation where you declare America is exceptional and somebody else says, America's not exceptional, our study last year really defines how our founding document makes our country exceptional, spanning through hundreds of years of history. So please check it out. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you back here tomorrow.